When my neighbor pressed a folded piece of paper into my palm at the front door, I thought he was handing me a grocery list he'd forgotten to give me earlier that week. It wasn't until I felt the firmness of his grip, the kind of grip that meant something, that I looked up at his face. He gave me one small, deliberate nod and walked back toward the dining room like nothing had happened. I stood in the hallway for 2 seconds, then stepped into the downstairs bathroom and locked the door behind me. The note said 4 words: check your 401k. Tonight. My neighbor had lived next door for 31 years. He'd retired as a branch manager from Fifth Third Bank 8 years ago. He wasn't a man who wrote dramatic notes. He wasn't a man who did anything without a reason. I sat down on the edge of the tub, pulled out my phone, and opened the Fidelity app with hands that had already started to shake before I'd even processed why. The password took me 3 tries. My fingers weren't cooperating. When the screen loaded, I saw the balance on my retirement account, and I genuinely thought the app had made a mistake. I thought there was a glitch, a display error, something technical that would be explained with one phone call to customer service. Because the number on that screen couldn't be right. My 401k balance showed $28,400. 14 months ago, it had been $419,000. I sat on the edge of that bathtub in the house my late wife and I had owned for 26 years, in the middle of a Christmas dinner I had spent 2 days preparing, and I scrolled through the transaction history with the kind of focused horror that shuts everything else out. Transfer after transfer, all listed as authorized, all sent to an external account I didn't recognize. The amounts varied: $18,000 here, $31,000 there, once a single transfer of $47,500, but the pattern was unmistakable. Careful. Systematic. Spread out just enough to stay under the threshold that would trigger an automatic alert. My son had been given limited account access last February. He had convinced me it was necessary. "Dad, you're 67 years old, and you're alone in that house," he had said, his voice full of the particular kind of concern that I'd thought came from love. "What if something happened to you? What if you had a medical emergency and couldn't manage your own bills? I'm your only family now. Let me help you." Mom would have wanted this. He had invoked his mother, and I had signed the paperwork. My wife had passed away from ovarian cancer in September 2 years earlier. We had been married for 38 years. She was a high school English teacher who had a habit of underlining passages in books and leaving them on my nightstand when she thought I needed to read something. After she was gone, the silence in this house became a physical thing, something with weight and texture that pressed down on me in the evenings. My son had offered to move back into his old room for a while, just until I found my footing. It had seemed like a blessing. I had not found it strange that he was between jobs when he moved back in. He was in commercial real estate, he said, and the market was in a rough patch. I had not found it strange that he seemed to always be on his phone, always taking calls he stepped outside for. He was a busy man. He was rebuilding something. I had been proud of him for getting back up. I splashed water on my face and looked at myself in the mirror above the sink. The man looking back at me was 67 years old and had spent 34 years as a civil engineer with the city of Columbus. I had overseen infrastructure projects worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I had caught cost overruns and contractor fraud and billing irregularities that my supervisors had completely missed. And I had let my own son walk into my financial life and drain it dry, because I had been lonely and grieving, and he had said your mother would have wanted this. I forced myself to breathe. Then I walked back out to the dining room. The table was full. My son sat at the far end, the chair where I normally sat, carving the second portion of the roast turkey with the easy confidence of a man who had already decided that everything here was his. My neighbor sat to my left, and when I eased back into my seat, he was talking to my son-in-law about the Ohio State game, with the completely relaxed expression of a man who had not just handed me a note that collapsed my world. My daughter was refilling glasses. Her 2 boys, 8 and 10, were arguing about something at the kids' corner of the table. The kitchen smelled like the rosemary and thyme stuffing my wife used to make, and that I had learned to approximate but never quite match. My son looked up when I sat down. "There you are. Dad, you okay? You look a little pale." "Just tired," I said. "All that cooking." He smiled and went back to the turkey. My neighbor reached past me for the bread basket and let his hand graze my arm just long enough to mean I see you. "Stay steady." We ate. I made conversation. I told my son-in-law about the tree I'd finally gotten around to cutting down in the backyard, and I listened to my grandson's debate whether reindeer were real, and I ate approximately 4 bites of food because my stomach had closed itself off entirely. My son talked about a new development project he was working on, something in the short North District, and I watched him charm the table the way he had always charmed every room he walked into since he was 15 years old, and realized that a big smile and the right words could get him almost anything. After dessert, my neighbor said he needed to get home to let his dog out. He looked at me across the table. "Walk me out, Howard. I want to show you something on my truck. I think you've got the same rattle on your Silverado." My son looked up. "Dad's truck is fine." "Come take a look anyway," my neighbor said pleasantly, already standing. "Won't take 2 minutes." The cold hit us the moment we stepped off the porch. December in Columbus, 15 degrees and dropping. My neighbor walked to his truck, opened the driver's door like he was looking for something, and then turned to face me. "Tell me what you saw," he said. $390,000 gone, I said, transferred out in increments over the past year. He closed his eyes briefly. "I was afraid of that." "How did you know?" He pulled out his phone and showed me a screenshot of a public records search. My property address, a home equity line of credit opened 6 months ago in my name for $200,000. I had not opened a home equity line of credit. "I still have contacts at the bank," my neighbor said. "I'm not going to tell you how I found this, because it's probably not entirely above board, but I needed to know if my instincts were right. Howard, there's more. I think he's also been using your identity to borrow against your pension." The HELOC draws started the same month as the 401k transfers. He needed the pension loan to cover something that came due before the 401k funds cleared. I leaned against the side of the truck. The cold was biting through my sweater, but I barely felt it. "He's been in there 2 hours every evening on your desktop," my neighbor said quietly. "I can see your office window from my kitchen. I noticed it 3 months ago. Started paying attention. Last month I watched him scanning documents for 40 minutes. I told myself I was being paranoid. Then last week I drove past the county recorder's office for my own property tax, and I stopped on a hunch. The HELOC is real, Howard. The lien is filed. Why didn't you come to me sooner?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because he's your son, and because I could be wrong about what it means. I wanted to be sure before I told you something that couldn't be unsaid." He looked at me directly. "I'm sure now." The Christmas lights on my neighbor's porch blinked blue and white in the dark. "I've already reached out to someone," he said, "former colleague. She moved into financial crimes investigation with the Columbus PD about 6 years ago. I didn't give her your name yet, but I told her the pattern, and she said if everything I described is accurate, it's wire fraud and identity theft at minimum. She can meet with us tonight if you want." "Tonight," she said she'd come to my house. "You don't have to go anywhere." I thought about my wife. I thought about the savings account she had insisted we keep completely separate, the one she called her just-in-case account, which I had teased her about for years because I thought she was being overly cautious. That account still had money in it. My son had never known about it. It had never occurred to me to add him to it because she had kept it in her name, and after she died I had simply transferred it to myself and left it in a drawer of my mind, one of those pieces of a marriage you don't know what to do with. He had not touched it. He did not know it existed. She had protected me even from beyond. "Call her," I said. My neighbor stepped away to make the call, and I stood in the December cold, thinking about all the dinners my son had eaten in that house, all the holidays, all the moments I had looked across a room at this person I had raised and felt the specific pride of a parent who believes they have done something right. I thought about teaching him to ride his bike in this driveway. I thought about sitting in the bleachers at his Little League games and his high school graduation and his first real estate closing when he called me from the parking lot almost in tears because he'd finally made it. I thought about my wife saying, once, very quietly, that she sometimes worried he had learned to use charm as a substitute for character. I had changed the subject. My neighbor came back. "She'll be at my house in 40 minutes. But Howard, she's going to need you to go back inside first. She wants him to feel comfortable. If he's planning to get you to sign anything tonight, and she said in these cases they almost always have documents ready, she wants you to draw him out. Get him talking. You want me to wear a wire. It's Ohio. Single-party consent state. You can record any conversation you're part of. Everything he says is admissible." He paused. "You don't have to do this." "He stole my retirement," I said. "He stole my wife's money. And if he's running the same scheme on other people, I have to stop him." I straightened up. What do I do? We went back inside under the cover of my neighbor, having found a loose bolt on the trailer hitch that he thought might match an issue on my truck. My son barely looked up. The kids were watching something on a tablet. My daughter was in the kitchen with my son-in-law doing dishes, and I could hear them talking and laughing about something, their voices warm and ordinary in the way that family voices sound when everything is normal. Nothing was normal. My son had moved to the living room with a glass of bourbon and a leather portfolio that had not been there when we sat down to dinner. He was scrolling through his phone with the ease of a man winding down a pleasant evening. "Dad, come sit down. There's something I wanted to go over with you." I sat in the armchair across from him. "What is it?" "Just some paperwork." He opened the portfolio. "Nothing urgent, but while we're all together it makes sense to handle it. Estate planning stuff. Mom's been gone 2 years and you've got a lot of assets that aren't properly structured. If something happened to you, probate would take everything. I've talked to a lawyer." "What kind of paperwork?" "A general POA update, mostly. The one you signed last year is pretty narrow. This one just gives me broader authority to manage your affairs if you're incapacitated." He slid a document across the coffee table. "Also, a property management agreement. Basically authorizes me to make decisions about the house on your behalf if needed." The lawyer said it's standard for someone in your situation. I picked up the first document and read it slowly. The language was dense, but I had spent 34 years reading government contracts. I understood every word. This document would have given him the authority to liquidate every asset I owned. "There's also something about the investment account," he said, his voice still easy and smooth. "I know you've been concerned about the returns. We may need to restructure the way the funds are allocated. Sign here, and I can work with your financial advisor directly, without having to loop you in on every decision." "I haven't been concerned about my investment returns," I said carefully. He looked up. "Sure you have. You told me last month you didn't understand what the quarterly statement was saying." I had never said that. But I recognized the technique. I had seen it in the psychiatric assessment language I would later learn he had already drafted on his personal laptop, a document claiming I had shown repeated signs of confusion and short-term memory disruption over the past 6 months. Signed with the forged credentials of a real neurologist at Ohio State's Wexner Medical Center, who had never met me, never evaluated me, never written a single word about my cognitive health. He had been building a paper trail to have me declared incompetent. "Actually," I said slowly, "I checked the account tonight, while you were in the kitchen." The room got very quiet. He took a sip of bourbon. "Oh yeah? The balance is a little lower than I remembered," I said. "Can you walk me through the recent activity?" Something moved across his face. It was fast, and if I hadn't been watching for it, I would have missed it. Just a fraction of a second, where the warmth in his eyes went somewhere else and something colder took its place. Then, the smile came back. "Dad, that's exactly what I'm trying to explain. The funds were reallocated into the development fund. I told you about this. You said you understood. What development fund? The Short North Project. The one I've been telling you about all year." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his voice dropping into the gentle register he used when he wanted me to feel like I was being taken care of. "Dad, I need you to trust me here. I have been managing your finances for almost a year, and I have made you money. The account balance looks different right now because the capital is invested. It's not liquid. That's how investing works. When the project closes, you are going to see returns you never got from that savings account." "How much did you invest?" "About $400,000. That's the full retirement balance minus operating reserves. I didn't authorize that." He paused. "Yes, you did. We talked about it in March. You said you trusted my judgment on the allocation. I would like to see the documentation of that conversation," I said. "Written authorization. A signed investment agreement. Anything with my name on it." The leather portfolio closed. "You're confused," he said, and his voice had changed now. The warmth stripped back just enough for me to hear something harder underneath. "This is exactly what I've been worried about, Dad. These gaps you've been having, the conversations you don't remember, the documents you think you've never seen. I've been covering for you because I love you and I didn't want to make it into a bigger deal than it needed to be, but maybe we need to talk seriously about what's going on with your memory." "My memory is fine." The neurologist didn't think so. I looked at him. "What neurologist?" He pulled a document from the back pocket of the portfolio. It was printed on Wexner Medical Center letterhead. My name was at the top. I had never set foot in that office. "I had you evaluated in October. he said. You don't remember it. That's part of the problem. He pushed the document across the table. I wasn't going to show you this because I didn't want to upset you. But since you're challenging me on the finances, I think you need to see it. I read the document. My hands were completely steady now, which surprised me, because everything inside me was shaking. The report used clinical language to describe a man who was forgetting appointments, repeating himself, struggling with basic financial concepts, showing signs of early-stage cognitive decline. It was thorough and detailed and entirely fabricated. This is a forgery, I said. Dad, I have never been to this office. I have never met this doctor. You manufactured this document. I put it down on the table, and I think you know that I know. The silence stretched out. Then he stood up. You have no idea what you're doing, he said, quietly now, the pretense of warmth gone entirely. I have legal authority over your accounts. Every transfer I made was within my rights under the agreement you signed. If you want to fight me on this, go ahead. But you're a 67-year-old man with a forged neurologist's report sitting on a coffee table, and in a legal proceeding, that document is going to matter a lot more than your version of events. I know about the HELOC, I said. He went very still. I know about the $200,000 line of credit opened against this house in my name. I know about the monthly draws. I know how much is left. I stood up, and I know about your development fund partners. I know you've been collecting investment capital from at least 3 other people using the same structure. How much have they put in? Shut up, he said, almost a whisper. How much? I said, shut up. You don't understand any of this. Those investments are real. I'm going to pay everyone back when the project closes. I just needed the capital to bridge a gap. It's a cash flow problem, not a theft. Everyone is going to get their money back. When? When the development closes. And if it doesn't close? He didn't answer. I want my money back, I said. All of it. Tonight. That's not how it works. His voice was tight now. The funds are illiquid. I cannot return $390,000 tonight. It doesn't exist in liquid form. Then, where is it? Invested. Where is it? The front door opened. 2 detectives from the Columbus Police Financial Crimes Unit came in, followed by my neighbor, who had let them in through the side entrance. My son spun around, his face going from controlled to panicked in the space of a single breath. Sir, the lead detective said, we have a warrant for your arrest on charges of wire fraud, identity theft, and financial exploitation of an elderly adult. We're also executing a simultaneous warrant for records at Midwest Capital Partners. Please put your hands where we can see them. This is my son started. Dad, tell them this is a misunderstanding. Tell them, but I had nothing to say. I watched them put handcuffs on my son in the living room of the house where he had grown up. I watched him look at me with an expression I didn't fully recognize, something between fury and a kind of desperate appeal that I think was the last remaining piece of the boy I remembered. And then the officers walked him out through the front door, and the cold air rushed in for a moment, and then the door closed, and the house was quiet. My daughter appeared in the doorway from the kitchen, her face white, her dish towel still in her hands. Her husband stood behind her. The boys were still watching their tablet in the other room, unaware. Dad, she said, what just happened? My neighbor put his hand on my shoulder. I was grateful for the weight of it. The investigation that followed took the better part of a year. My son had defrauded 4 investors total, including 2 longtime colleagues who had trusted him with their retirement savings based on nothing more than years of friendship and the easy confidence he had always worn like a second skin. One of them had put in $340,000. Another had borrowed against their home for $175,000 based on projected returns my son had fabricated in a spreadsheet. The Midwest Capital Development Project was real, but it had been undercapitalized from the beginning, propped up by new investor money to give the appearance of momentum while the underlying numbers collapsed. The HELOC draws had been funding his actual lifestyle, the luxury apartment he kept in the short north, the car lease, the private club memberships, the things I had never questioned, because I had not wanted to seem like a father who measured his son's success by what he could afford. His lawyer argued that I had given broad financial authorization and that the transfers, while aggressive, had been made in good faith as investment decisions. The forged neurologist report, the one he had intended to use to have me declared incompetent and take full legal control of my remaining assets, my house, my pension, my everything, became the centerpiece of the prosecution's case. Digital forensics matched the metadata on that document to my son's personal laptop. The neurologist, whose credentials had been used, confirmed she had never evaluated me, never spoken to my son, never authorized her name or signature to appear on any document related to my care. That evidence, combined with the recording from Christmas night and the financial records subpoenaed from 3 different institutions, made the case impossible to argue away. He was convicted on 7 counts. The judge sentenced him to 9 years in federal prison. I did not attend the sentencing. I sat in my backyard on a cold March morning and listened to the cardinal that lived in the oak tree at the back fence, and thought about my wife and tried to understand how love and betrayal could occupy the same person simultaneously, and whether that was something a parent ever fully makes sense of. My daughter did not speak to me for almost 8 months. She believed for a long time that I had gone to the police without giving her brother a chance to explain, that I had moved too fast, that I had chosen the other investors over my own family. Her husband, to his credit, was steadier than that. He never told her what to feel, but he kept showing her the documents, the facts, the timeline. He kept asking her quietly whether, if the situation were reversed, she would have wanted someone to stop her. She came to me in November of that year. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where 37 years of family dinners had happened, and she cried for a long time without saying much. I let her. There was nothing to explain that she didn't already know. What I miss most is not the money. I sold the house the following spring. I couldn't stay there anymore. Too many rooms had been changed by what happened in them, and the market was good, and I needed the capital to offset the legal costs and the partial recovery funds I'd been offered from the fraud restitution pool. I live in a 2-bedroom condo in Upper Arlington now, 10 minutes from my daughter's house. It's smaller and quieter, and I've started cooking again, which I'd stopped doing after my wife died. I recovered about $90,000 through the court restitution process. The other investors recovered even less. The man who had borrowed against his house lost it 6 months before the fraud verdict came in, when the bank called the loan and he had nothing left to service it. He and I still talk by phone sometimes. There is a particular kind of fellowship between people who have been defrauded by someone they trusted. You understand each other without having to explain much. The AARP Financial Fraud Prevention Program found me through my daughter's hospital, where she works as a physical therapist, and mentioned my story to someone on the volunteer board. I started speaking to senior groups in January of this year, retirement communities, church halls, library meeting rooms, anywhere they'd have me. I tell them the things I wish someone had told me before that February afternoon when I signed a document because my son looked at me with his mother's eyes and said she would have wanted this. I tell them to never give unrestricted signing authority to any single person, family or not. To keep at least one account completely separate, one that no one else knows exists. To review their transaction history themselves, every month, not because they don't trust their family, but because trust is not a substitute for verification. To understand that financial abuse of older adults accounts for billions of dollars in losses every year in this country, and that the perpetrators are family members in the majority of reported cases, and that smart, educated, careful people get taken because the person doing it knows exactly which doors have been left unlocked by grief, or loneliness, or the simple human need to believe that the people you raised turned out well. I tell them, if something feels wrong, it probably is. Your instincts are not confusion. Your questions are not symptoms. Don't let anyone convince you that asking to see documentation is a sign that something is wrong with your mind. My neighbor and I still take our coffee on his back porch on Saturday mornings when the weather allows, and sometimes when it doesn't. He has a yellow lab named Walter who likes to put his head in my lap, and we talk about baseball and city council decisions and occasionally about whether either of us will try dating again someday, which is a conversation we both find uncomfortable and therefore have fairly often. He never asks me how I'm doing in the specific way that means he's asking about my son. He knows I'll say something when I have something to say. My son has been in federal prison for 14 months. He writes letters sometimes, addressed to my old house, which the new owners forward to my daughter, who brings them to me. I have not opened any of them. They sit in a shoebox on the top shelf of my closet, and sometimes I think about what's in them, explanations, maybe, or apologies, or the kind of self-justifying logic that sounds like remorse but isn't quite, and I decide I'm not ready. Maybe I'll read them someday. Maybe I won't. What I know is this. The morning my neighbor pressed that note into my hand, I had a choice. I could have decided that what I didn't know couldn't hurt me any more than it already had. I could have signed those documents and let my son finish what he started and told myself that family loyalty required looking the other way. Part of me wanted to. I won't pretend it didn't. He is my son. I held him in the delivery room at Riverside Hospital 67 years ago this coming March, minus the 34 years it took to get there, which is my way of saying I've known him his entire life, and I would give almost anything for him to have been a different person. But staying silent would have meant the man who lost his house lost it for nothing. It would have meant the next round of investors, whoever they were, would have lost theirs too. It would have meant teaching my grandchildren that the way you protect someone you love is by pretending their crimes don't exist, which is not protection. That's complicity dressed up to look like loyalty. My wife used to say that integrity is what you do when no one is watching, and nothing is convenient. She said it to our kids when they were young, and she said it to me once, very quietly, after a situation at work where I had looked the other way on something I should have flagged. I had never forgotten it, even though I had not always lived up to it. That December night, I tried. I think she would have been proud of me. Not for what I had to do, but for doing it anyway. That's worth something. Some days it's worth everything I have left.